What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today I'm giving you 24 potential head coaching candidates for next off season. If you didn't see basically the first part of this two-part video series, it was 6 coaches who should be or already are on the hot seat, and this is the follow-up to it with guys who may potentially take their job if those 6 candidates were to inevitably be fired. Not saying they will, but if they were, here are 24 names to keep your eyes on and monitor throughout this upcoming college football season and NFL season alike. But with all that said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Please hit that like button if you do. And if you're new to the channel, actually about 87% of people who watch my videos are not subscribed to the channel, which makes sense. We're almost at 100 subs though, so if you're new to the channel, like what you see, want to help us hit that milestone, I would greatly appreciate it. And comment down below in the comment section what you think of my 24 coaching candidates, as well as a couple other names I maybe should have included and that you're keeping an eye on as guys who may potentially become head coaches next offseason or maybe even further down the line. With all that said, all the maintenance taken care of, let's talk about the college guys. And so, I have these set up into 4 different categories, 6 names per grouping. So starting with the college guys, no real surprises here, right? Like Lincoln Riley, offensive guru, has worked wonders with QBs, whether, it was Jalen Hurts, he turned him into a second-round pick. He made Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray consecutive Heisman winners and #1 overall picks. And as of right now, Spencer Rattler's the odds-on betting favorite to win the Heisman, and he's the odds-on pick to probably go #1 overall if you were looking for that information. So it makes a ton of sense. This is the guy I wish the Cowboys hired instead of Mike McCarthy, but headaches of having a first-time NFL head coach is difficult, and plus the leap from college to the NFL is tricky, no doubt about it. A lot of the same could be said about Ryan Day. I mean, what a fantastic hire for Ohio State. He was already in the building, obviously, at the end of the Urban Meyer era. He was the offensive coordinator. Seamless transition. He's kept the Buckeyes playing at a high level. Apparently, he was kicked around a little bit with some potential interviews with NFL teams this past offseason, so it'll be interesting to see if that builds upon it, especially if Urban Meyer has a lot of success immediately in Jacksonville. Then I could see Ryan Day's name start to get hot, building off the coattails of that. Matt Campbell, Dan Campbell, new head coach of the Lions, even joked that, how he got the job was by making him think that he was Matt Campbell from Iowa State. And that kind of just speaks to how good of a job Matt Campbell has done turning around that program. You don't really think about Iowa State with football, but he has turned them into one of the best teams in the Big 12, a Power 5 conference. So a lot of credit to Matt Campbell. And Dan Mullen's another name that, if Urban Meyer has success, it'll be interesting to see, because Dan Mullen was his offensive coordinator in Florida. Now he's back the head coach at the same university, and that offense has a lot of explosive ability to it. It obviously was an explosive offense last year, and that was with Kyle Trask, who isn't necessarily the QB that Dan Mullen builds an offense for, right? Think Tim Tebow and think about their projected starter this year. Guys who have a ton of mobility, and then you build a passing game around that. So interesting to see how Dan Mullen might be able to sneak his way in, maybe do a couple of interviews. Not sure he'll land a coaching job or anything like that, or maybe it's even something he goes from the college game to the NFL ranks as an offensive coordinator. Just something to keep your eye on. Pat Fitzgerald, a lot of the same things that we said about Matt Campbell, really turned that program into one of the best inside its conference. Fitzgerald has been long rumored to be in and around head coaching discussions and the hiring process, so wouldn't surprise me, I should say, if he were to have that continue next offseason. And then Brian Kelly, again, a guy who had his name swirled around, almost took the Eagles job in 2013, actually, out of back when he was working with Cincinnati. As a Notre Dame fan, I hope he doesn't leave, just because he's brought so much stability and kept us in and around the college football playoff, which, haven't won a game yet, but we've lost to the teams that go on to win the national championship, which I think speaks for itself. But getting into the playoffs is good for recruiting. Brian Kelly has brought a ton of stability to a program that, was really up and down. The Charlie Weiss era, I can go on and on. After Lou Holtz, it was a rocky time to be a Fighting Irish fan, but Brian Kelly has smoothed over the waters, if that's an expression people use. And that brings us to our second group of candidates. The duh guys is how I termed it, just because, obviously these are the names that, as of right now, we would expect to be in and around those head coaching discussions and getting interviews next head coaching carousel. Eric Bieniemy, it's kind of amazing he didn't get a job last hiring cycle, especially with the NFL moving towards trying to promote teams to hire minority coaches. Even with that aside, Eric Bieniemy has been the offensive coordinator for the most productive, explosive, whatever word you want to use to describe the Chiefs offense. He's been the OC for that team the last 2 years. And 2 off seasons ago, it was, when he started to become a household name, started to get interviews, didn't happen that cycle. So it felt like it was only a matter of time. It was going to be this past off season. And still teams passed on him. I would have loved to seen him end up in Houston. I think that would have, eased over a lot of the tensions with Deshaun Watson prior to all his off the field problems that have grown over time. I think the Chargers would have been a really fun fit for him as well, and among others. But I think this is the cycle where Eric Bieniemy definitely gets a job. And speaking of somebody who could have been a good potential fit with the Chargers, Brian Daboll, with how good of a job he's done progressing Josh Allen from year 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3 where he was second in the MVP voting, felt like Daboll would have been a really good hire to further progress Justin Herbert, but I'm not questioning the Brandon Staley hire, it's just in a different direction. Daboll feels like a guy who's going to go to a team with a young quarterback or going to be picking early in the first round to get the franchise quarterback. Daboll's done a fantastic job with Josh Allen. You expect to see the same wherever he becomes a head coach. Joe Brady. And I mean, I'm not going to do this for all these names, but I will say, I had Zach Taylor on those 6 coaches who should be or already are on the hot seat video. And I think if Zach Taylor were to lose his job, they'd go in a defensive route, maybe like a Todd Bowles who's on this dud list. But man, if they just really wanted to buy into that LSU, let's go, crazy with the offense. You bring in Joe Brady, you already have Joe Burrow, you have Jamar Chase. That would be so sick to watch. That would be a blast to watch. Even as a Steelers fan in that division, I would have a ton of fun watching the Bengals, but I don't think that's the route they would go if they moved on from Zach Taylor. But Joe Brady got a couple of interviews for head coaching positions, including with the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, same thing we talked about with Daboll, same thing we said about Bieniemy. He's going to go to a team that is looking for a spark in their offense. And Joe Brady, give him credit, got a lot out of Teddy Bridgewater and obviously put together and was the passing game coordinator for the most prolific passing attack we've seen in college football history, at least to this date. So, a lot of good things when you talk about Joe Brady, and makes for a really impressive resume. Matt Eberflus, one of the 2 defensive coordinators, him and Todd Bowles on this dud list. Eberflus was in and around potential head coaching jobs. Name was mentioned a lot. Felt like he was going to get one last offseason, so it makes it feel like he's going to be a shoo-in for any potential jobs next year. Really like that cover 2 scheme. It's really revitalized the career of someone like Xavier Rhodes. So for a team that maybe already has a good offense, think Cincinnati, and then is just looking to stabilize or equalize really the defense to the level at which the offense plays, Eberflus could definitely be a guy who does that. Additionally, he's worked with Frank Reich, and Nick Sirianni was the OC last year in Indy. He's now a head coach, so he's been around a lot of other quality minds, at least according to the NFL and how they look at those coaches. Then on to Todd Bowles. I was surprised he didn't get the Philadelphia job. After they fired Doug Peterson, I figured they'd go stable, someone who's been in that position before, and probably someone who's on the defensive side of the ball. Instead, they go in the complete opposite direction. First-time head coach. Nick Sirianni's 39 years old, if my memory serves, as opposed to the experience that Todd Bowles brings, which just an absolute W for Tampa Bay. The fact Byron Leftwich, who we'll talk about later, and Todd Bowles are back hooking up with the team that is the exact same, and you still have Bruce Arians, obviously. That team is just unbelievable. I've been on this tangent before, but next offseason, I could definitely see Todd Bowles landing a head coaching gig, especially for a team that's looking to stabilize the defense, but also just looking for leadership. Think about how we kind of view Dan Campbell and how he's going to change the culture. I think Todd Bowles, being that really the Jets and the Sam Darnold era, was at its most successful point under Todd Bowles. He had a good culture. Things were starting to move in the right direction before the Jets decided to make a change. I think you could see something similar for a team next year, and then that could lead Todd Bowles to being the head coach of the future for that franchise. And then Josh McDaniels. It still feels like he's the guy to replace Bill Belichick, but man, every year he seems to get into these final rounds of interviews for these teams. He was in that sort of position with Cincinnati. Good offensive mind, highly regarded, been a head coach before, got out to an 8-0 start with Denver. I feel like that's one of the teams that we always forget was undefeated, to the halfway point of the season. Kyle Orton was their quarterback. Really just remarkable beginning of the year. But then things obviously petered off, and then McDaniels drafts Tim Tebow, and, they did win a playoff game with him, so give him credit. But then, he doesn't last a whole lot longer with the Broncos, but maybe a second chance at a head coaching position. He's learned more about himself as well as the game. I could definitely see this guy becoming a head coach somewhere other than New England. Keep in mind the whole Indianapolis situation that led to Frank Reich becoming the head coach of the Colts. I don't know if a lot of other teams are really willing to roll the dice on McDaniels and maybe him doing that again. I don't know. To me, he still feels like the protege to Bill Belichick and the guy who's going to succeed Belichick. But, you know, hey, anything could happen. So now on to our maybe category. These are definitely names who should be in a qualified to be around head coaching discussions. They're just not the slam dunks, like the clear-cut choice that if there's like 2 jobs available, I'm thinking it's Todd Bowles, Eric Bieniemy, Brian Daboll, you know, those type of dudes. But these could be a little bit outside the box, not fully. We're going to get that once we get to the sleeper category, but these are definitely some names that could, you know, with a good season, work their way into some head coaching interviews and eventually take the job itself. So starting with Don Wink Martindale, he's always been someone who knows how to scheme up pressure, and I could see the Ravens defense having a whole lot of sacks, and people will look at it and say, well, they're doing that with Tyus Bowser and Pernell McPhee and a second-year guy like Patrick Queen, who's an athletic linebacker, and a rookie in Odafe Oweh. Wow, Wink Martindale just is on another level right now. And then a team that's looking for a defensive-minded head coach, I could see Martindale, you know, being the guy they're looking for. And Marvin Lewis interviewed for a couple jobs this past hiring cycle, including with the Houston Texans. Longtime head coach in Cincinnati. Right now he's just a special advisor at Arizona State, but that's for Herm Edwards, who was a former NFL player and NFL coach. So that's, you know, a position that, while it's not a coordinator spot, it's a pretty decent spot to have to still have some gravitas and some eye-catching nature to it. So I could definitely see Lewis getting back into some interviews next offseason. Then Patrick Graham. I mean, only had the 1 year this past year with the Giants defense, but I don't see them getting any worse. If anything, they got better. They added Azeez Ojulari. They bolstered up the secondary with the signing of Adoree Jackson. I think this Giants defense is going to be really good, and Patrick Graham has proven to be a really creative defensive mind, and this could be someone who gets like a Brandon Staley type of treatment where young guy, you like what he does on the defense, innovative in that side of the football. You pair him up with a team that already has a good offense, and that could be a pathway to success for sure. And then we get to a couple more offensive coordinators. Kellen Moore, and both former quarterbacks, should I add to that. Kellen Moore has long been somebody that the Cowboys organization, but also the NFL in general, has spoken highly of. I mean, just think about, you go from Jason Garrett to Mike McCarthy, and Mike McCarthy makes sure that Kellen Moore stays as an OC. He also had a couple of requests to be interviewed last offseason. So with the offense of Dallas being so explosive, they're going to put up huge numbers, and that's only going to pat the resume that much more for Kellen Moore. So I think he's going to have a really good case to potentially get a head coaching job. And Byron Leftwich, I mean, 30 interceptions for Jameis Winston. You know, Byron Leftwich isn't making those decisions, right? And we know Jameis is a gunslinger in nature, and he likes to take risks, but he also had a pretty efficient offense per PFF numbers. I mean, and also think Jameis threw for 5,000 yards, 30-plus touchdowns. There's got to be some credit given to the OC there. And then last year, I know Brady was the factor that we point to as why the Bucs won, but Leftwich made sure they didn't disappoint. It was still a very efficient offense, and he was able to work the ball around, right? Like Mike Evans, if he wasn't injured, was playing at a high level. Chris Godwin, when he wasn't dropping the football 5 times against the Washington football team in the playoffs, in the wild card round it was, and you know, when he was healthy, he was putting up good numbers. Even Antonio Brown at the end of the year was very productive. Byron Leftwich has done a masterful job, and also, kind of like in the game of baseball where you'll set up a pitch to then go to another one, fastball on the outside corner to set up a slider and a 2-strike count, or you know, basketball, you have a sharpshooter makes a couple shots, then you have to respect the shot fake. Byron Leftwich does a great job scripting plays to build off of one another, and you really saw it in the postseason. That was when I watched Tampa Bay. The closest, obviously, was the playoff run last year, and there were so many times where you would see a play drawn up, and you know, it's a good play, whatever, and then later you get a similar look, and then it's the complete opposite, and the defense is fully on their toes. They don't even know what's about to hit them, and I think a lot of credit there has to be given to Byron Leftwich. Also, with Moore and Leftwich, former quarterbacks, so I could definitely see in a situation where I don't think Denver should move on from Vic Fangio, but if they're in a position where they're thinking, all right, we have to move up, we got to pull in the 49ers, we got to get a quarterback early in the draft, but we want an offensive-minded head coach, Leftwich and Moore make a ton of sense as guys who played the position, are creative, know how to draw people open, also have experience working with talented wide receiver, pass-catching cores around a quarterback. So I could really see Kellen Moore, Byron Leftwich being guys who, if the Broncos job gets open, make a ton of sense, at least in my mind as of right now. And the final maybe guy, Dennis Allen, was a head coach with the Raiders. Didn't necessarily go over great, but since taking over for the Saints, he's done a really fine job. And that team has always had holes, but they've done a good job hiding them. And I think a lot of credit there has to go to Dennis Allen. On to our final group of potential head coaching candidates for next offseason. This is the group that really inspired me to make this list and talk about who potentially could be on a hot seat. I don't really like talking about people losing their jobs, but these sleeper candidates are a lot of fun. And we'll start with Kevin O'Connell. This one's not necessarily a full sleeper, but no one's really mentioned him as a guy who could become a head coach. He was an OC in Washington, and he was the last of the likes of Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, that all were in Washington before Kevin O'Connell. And now he follows Sean McVay out to LA. He's the offensive coordinator for the Rams. And I think it's going to be a very explosive, very efficient offense, especially now with Matt Stafford. You think it takes the offense up a little bit, even if you're not crazy about Stafford. He is better than Jared Goff. And I think Kevin O'Connell will finally start to get some recognition and start to get some interviews. Again, don't know if he'll get the job, but he'll start to make his way into the interview process. And on a very similar note, Shane Waldron was the Rams passing game coordinator and now is the Seahawks OC. And he likes to work horizontally, make you defend every inch of the grass, which, is very McVay, is very Andy Reid-like. And especially with a guy like Dwayne Eskridge, who they took in the second round, I think he really does fit well with what Shane Waldron wants to do with jet sweeps, end arounds, and those bubble screens and all that type of nature. So I think Eskridge actually fits what Waldron wants. It almost makes me think that was a Waldron type of pick. And if he has a good year, and let's say Russell Wilson, as opposed to being fantastic the first 7 games like he was last year, he puts together for a great 17, Shane Waldron is going to get a lot of credit. And he's going to start making his way into the head coaching interview process, and he's going to put his name on the map. Kind of think about Eric Bieniemy 2 years ago, where it was like, hey, this guy has to get credit. He's another one of those in that tree. Waldron coming from the McVay tree, Bieniemy from the Reid tree. It's going to start to catch on, and maybe not this cycle, but then the cycle after. I think Shane Waldron puts himself in a really strong position to eventually become a head coach. And then somebody, if you're familiar with the channel, I love Aaron Glenn. Was a defensive back in the NFL, was a DB's coach in New Orleans, and he did a fantastic job. Marshawn Lattimore was a top 10 pick, but he was still somebody who, when he was drafted, people saw as great athlete, needs to get ready for the NFL level, and I'd say that transition has gone very smoothly. Marcus Williams was a, later round pick, not necessarily later, but mid-round guy who's emerged as one of the better safeties in football. He also helped revitalize Janoris Jenkins, Eli Apple, all those guys. Or one, talented, but two, some credit has to be given to Aaron Glenn. And now he's heading out to Detroit, which we know not to be a good defense. And if that defense picks it up a little bit, if he can get more out of, we'll start with the pass rushers, Trey Flowers, if maybe the Okwara brothers become a really good tandem, Glenn will get credit. But where his mark will be is with the secondary. What does Will Harris look like? What does Tracy Walker develop into? Jeff Okudah is the X factor of it all, largely because he was a top 5 pick, and at the college level, he was dominant, and he still has the athletic ability. It's clear that he just needed, some experience at the NFL level. It's not an easy leap to make, but also he needs to be coached up a little bit. And if Aaron Glenn can turn Okudah around and get him to where the Lions thought he would be, given he was, the number 3 overall pick in that class, that bodes well for Aaron Glenn, but also the production and development of Amani Ruwarie, Ifeatu Melifonwu, who you just took in the 3rd round. All of that will really sing the praises for Aaron Glenn, and I could see him becoming the next defensive-minded coach that makes that, again, kind of referencing him here, but Brandon Staley type of rise where it wasn't really on your radar the year before, but then when he gets hired, you're like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and I could see that same sort of climb up the ladder for Aaron Glenn. On to Klint Kubiak. He's now the Vikings offensive coordinator, taking over for his dad, Gary Kubiak, and, well, the stars are starting to align for Klint Kubiak to eventually become a head coach. One, you talk about the family lineage, think Kyle Shanahan to Mike Shanahan. One, Kyle's just a fantastic offensive mind, but Gary Kubiak was a very good offensive coordinator and head coach at the NFL level. Don't forget his success and his part of Denver winning a Super Bowl. And now Klint Kubiak takes over, and, if he keeps that Minnesota offense as productive and as efficient and explosive as it was last year under Gary Kubiak, that's going to bode well. This is going to be a Vikings offense that puts up points. He has the name factor. All that points in the direction of maybe not this cycle, which I think he'll get interviews, and I think he'll get deep into the process for a couple of teams, depending on how many hires there are. But if not this year, the year after, maybe even 2 years down the line, Klint Kubiak is definitely a guy I could see becoming a head coach for a team that's looking for an offensive spark. Mike Kafka had an interview with the Eagles, used to play the quarterback position for Philadelphia, now the QB coach in Kansas City. Obviously, that's a good position. I thought that Eric Bieniemy would get a job, and then Mike Kafka would take over as the OC, and then there would be that, progressive lineage to where he eventually becomes a head coach. Still think he could get there, but as a QB coach, you're kind of getting that Zach Taylor position where that hasn't really panned out a whole lot, so that might put a sour taste in some team's mouth, taking a QB coach and making him a head coach. But Mike Kafka played the position. He works under Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, two high-level football minds, and he works with Patrick Mahomes. So those are all good things to have on your resume. So this could definitely be a sleeper pick for a team that's, picking high in the draft, looking to develop a quarterback. Mike Kafka might be the guy they're looking for. And the final name we'll talk about, Jerod Mayo. This is in the vein of Mike Vrabel and then Brian Flores. Vrabel more so with the Jerod Mayo, former linebacker for New England, but also coming from that tree. Mike Vrabel had a ton of coaching experience in Houston. Jerod Mayo is getting it with his former team in New England, and Brian Flores was the linebacker coach before going down to Miami, and we see how that has turned out for the Dolphins. He is an excellent hire, great defensive mind. And I could see Jerod Mayo with those factors lining up, and especially if that inside linebacking core takes a step forward. It's not a whole lot of guys you look at and you're like, those guys are studs. Those guys are going to be freaks. They're going to dominate the middle of the field. So if Jerod Mayo can get those guys to take a step up and play better than maybe we would assess them just based off of their name on a piece of paper, that's going to really bode well for Jerod Mayo, and that's going to be a good indication that he is, maybe not this cycle, but the cycle after, a head coach in the making. But that's going to do it. These are my 24 potential head coaching candidates for next offseason. I'll probably do this again once we get to next offseason with some names I think are better fit. And, we might have some more sleepers to talk about. Also, if you're wondering why not 25, because there's 24, well, that's because number 25 is your mom. But in all seriousness, if you want to give me candidate number 25, tell me somebody I didn't have on this list that I should have, and I will consider it. We can have a good, fruitful discussion. I respond to every comment in the comment section. So you help me out. Give me coaching candidate number 25, and I'd love to have that conversation. Love to hear your point for why you think they could be a head coach. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. But that's going to do it for this video. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej. I'm signing off.